Chapter 1. A World Divided. The year is 1945. The war is over. Cities are destroyed. Millions are dead. But peace? It is fragile, uncertain. The world should be safe now, but it is not. In the East, the Soviet Union grows stronger. It controls Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. More countries fall under its power. The Red Army stays. It does not leave. Some call it liberation. Others call it occupation. In the West, fear spreads. The Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin, is powerful and unpredictable. His army is the biggest in the world. His influence stretches across Europe. What does he want? How far will he go? No one knows. Leaders in the United States, Britain, and France meet. They talk. They worry. They argue. We need to stop Soviet expansion, they say. But how? They remember the war. They remember Hitler. They remember how appeasement failed. They cannot make the same mistake again. A new conflict begins, not with guns, not with bombs, but with fear. The Cold War. Two sides, two ideologies. Democracy in the West, communism in the East. There is no middle ground. The world is divided. Then, in 1948, Berlin. The city is in crisis. The Soviets cut off all roads. No food, no supplies. 2 million people trapped. What can the West do? A difficult choice. Fight? Surrender? Number A, new plan. Something never done before. Planes, hundreds of them, flying every hour, dropping food, medicine, coal. The Berlin airlift. A victory without war. The blockade fails. But the message is clear. Stalin will not stop. Western countries must act. They need protection. They need strength. They need unity. And so, in 1949, an idea becomes reality. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, is born. 12 countries join. The United States, Canada, Britain, France, and more. They make a promise. An attack on one is an attack on all. If war comes, they will stand together. They will defend each other. But the Soviets, they see NATO as a threat. They build their own alliance, the Warsaw Pact. The division is complete. Two sides, two armies, watching, waiting, preparing. Tensions grow. The arms race begins. The Soviet Union builds nuclear weapons. The United States responds. More bombs, more missiles. The world is in danger. A mistake, a misunderstanding, could mean the end of everything. And yet, NATO stays strong. It does not attack. It does not start a war. It stands as a shield, a wall against Soviet power. Some believe NATO will keep the peace. Others fear it will only delay the inevitable. For now, the world is quiet. But the Cold War has only just begun. Chapter 2. The Cold War begins. The war is over, but peace does not come. A new battle begins, not with guns, not with bombs, but with power, control, and fear. The world is split in two, East and West. One side follows democracy, the other follows communism. The fight for influence begins. In Eastern Europe, Soviet tanks roll through the streets. Soldiers march, governments fall. One by one, countries come under Soviet control. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary. Stalin's grip tightens. There is no escape. Leaders disappear. Newspapers print only what the government allows. People whisper in fear. The Soviet Union is growing, unstoppable. The West watches. Leaders in Washington, London, and Paris are alarmed. We cannot let this continue, they say. But what can they do? No one wants another war. The memory of World War II is too fresh, too painful. The world is still rebuilding. Cities are still in ruins. Families are still mourning their dead. Another war would be unthinkable. And yet, war seems close. Too close. In Germany, the tension reaches its peak. Berlin, once the heart of the Nazi Empire, is now a divided city. The West controls one half. The Soviets control the other. A city split between two worlds. People cross from east to west, hoping for freedom, for a better life. Stalin is angry. He wants control. He wants the whole city. He decides to act. June 24th, 1948. The blockade begins. Soviet troops surround West Berlin. No food, no fuel, no medicine. Roads are blocked. Trains stop. The city is trapped. 2 million people, cut off from the world. How long can they survive? Days, weeks. The Soviets wait. They believe the West will surrender. They believe Berlin will fall into their hands. But the West does not give up. The United States and its allies make a decision. If they cannot send supplies by road, they will send them by air. Planes fill the sky. Every hour, they land in Berlin, bringing food, coal, and medicine. Pilots risk their lives, flying low, avoiding Soviet fire. The people of Berlin watch from their windows. They see hope in the sky. The Berlin airlift has begun. For almost a year, the planes do not stop. They bring everything the city needs: milk, bread, fuel, even candy for the children. The Soviets try to stop it. They threaten war. But NATO stands firm. The world watches. The world waits. Then, May 12th, 1949. The blockade ends. The Soviets back down. They have failed. West Berlin survives. It is a victory for NATO, a victory for the West. But the danger is not over. Stalin is furious. He sees NATO as a threat. The West sees the Soviet Union as an enemy. Both sides prepare. They build armies. They build weapons. And then they build bombs. Nuclear bombs. The most powerful weapons the world has ever seen. The United States has them first. But in 1949, the Soviets test their own. The world changes forever. Now, war is not just about soldiers and tanks. Now, war could destroy everything. One bomb, one mistake, the end of cities, the end of nations, the end of life. Tensions rise. Both sides want power. Neither side wants to be weak. But no one dares to attack. The fear is too great. The cost is too high. And so, a strange kind of war begins. A war without battles. A war without front lines. A war of spies, secrets, and silent threats. The Cold War. The West and the East watch each other closely. Who will act first? Who will make the next move? The Cold War is just beginning, and no one knows how it will end. Chapter 3. The Soviet Threat. The world is changing, and it is changing fast. The United States was once the only country with nuclear weapons, but now the The Soviet Union has them too. The balance of power shifts. The West is no longer safe. One bomb, one decision could destroy everything. Fear spreads across Europe. Governments prepare for the worst. Underground shelters are built. Schools teach children how to hide under desks. Sirens are tested. The message is clear. War could come at any moment. But this war will be different. It will not be fought with tanks and soldiers. It will be fought with weapons so powerful that no one can win. The arms race begins. Both sides rush to build more bombs, bigger bombs, deadlier bombs. The United States builds the hydrogen bomb. The Soviets follow. Submarines carry missiles beneath the ocean. Planes fly higher, faster, ready to strike at any time. The numbers grow. Hundreds of bombs, then thousands. Enough to destroy the world many times over. But something strange happens. The more weapons they build, the less likely they are to use them. Both sides understand. If one attacks, the other will strike back. No one will survive. This idea has a name: mutually assured destruction. A frightening balance. A world held together by fear. NATO must act. But how do you stop a war without starting one? The answer is deterrence. Show strength. Show power. Make the enemy afraid to attack. NATO places missiles in Europe, close to Soviet borders. Troops move. Bases are built. The message is clear. We are ready. The Soviets do the same. They build their own alliance, the Warsaw Pact. Eastern Europe becomes a fortress. Walls are built. Borders close. People try to escape, but many never make it. The Iron Curtain falls across Europe. Two worlds. Two enemies. No way out. The crisis grows. Tensions rise. In 1956, Hungary rebels. People march in the streets. They demand freedom. They demand change. The Soviet tanks roll in. Gunfire, smoke, screams. The world watches. But NATO does nothing. The risk is too high. One wrong move could start World War III. In 1961, another crisis. Berlin. People flee from east to west, searching for freedom. The Soviets want to stop them. The answer? A wall. A wall of concrete, of guards, of guns. Families are torn apart. The West protests, but the wall stays. Berlin is locked in place. The world is watching, waiting. Then, in 1962, the Cold War reaches its most dangerous moment. The Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union sends nuclear missiles to Cuba, just 90 miles from the U.S. coast. The world holds its breath. American warships surround the island. A standoff. A single mistake could mean war. For 13 days, the world is on the edge. The U.S. demands the missiles be removed. The Soviets refuse. The world waits. Then, at the last moment, an agreement. The missiles leave. The crisis is over. But the fear remains. If war comes, no one will survive. Leaders on both sides begin to talk. They sign treaties. They limit weapons. They install a hotline, a direct phone line between Washington and Moscow. A small step, but an important one. The Cold War is far from over, but the world has seen the danger. The race for weapons slows, but the fear never disappears. For now, NATO stands firm. The Soviet Union remains strong. The balance of power holds. But how long can it last? The Cold War is not finished, and the future is uncertain. Chapter 4: Crisis and Conflict. The sun rises over Cuba. Palm trees sway in the warm breeze. The sea is calm. The streets are quiet. But beneath the surface, danger is growing. A secret is discovered. Planes fly high above the island. They take photographs. Long, dark shapes appear in the images. Not buildings, not ships. Something worse. Missiles, Soviet missiles, pointed at the United States, ready to launch. The White House receives the news. Shock, fear, anger. The president, John F. Kennedy, gathers his advisors. The message is clear. This cannot stand. But what can they do? Bomb the sites? Invade Cuba? Block the island? Every choice is dangerous. Every choice could lead to war. The world listens. Radio stations repeat the news. Newspapers print bold headlines. Television screens show maps with red circles. Miami, Washington, New York, all in range. The Soviet Union has gone too far. The United States will not back down. Kennedy speaks to the nation. His voice is calm, but the words are sharp. The United States will not accept Soviet missiles in Cuba. A blockade is announced. No ships will be allowed in. No weapons will reach the island. The world holds its breath. Soviet ships are on their way. Will they stop, or will they push through? One mistake, one shot, and the world will be at war. The tension is unbearable. In homes, people listen to their radios. In schools, children practice hiding under desks. In the streets, conversations are whispered. What will happen next? NATO watches. Allies stand together. Britain, France, Canada, they support the U.S., but they know the risk. If war begins, no one is safe. Nuclear weapons could destroy entire cities. Millions could die. The Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, faces his own decision. His generals want to fight. His advisors say, do not show weakness. But he knows the truth. A war with NATO, a war with the U.S., could be the end of everything. The ships move closer. The U.S. Navy waits fingers on triggers. Missiles ready. One order, one signal, and the battle begins. Then, suddenly, the ships stop. The world exhales. The first step back from the edge. Talks begin. Messages travel between Washington and Moscow. The tension does not disappear, but there is hope. An agreement is reached. The Soviet Union will remove the missiles. In return, the U.S. will not invade Cuba. A secret deal is made. American missiles in Turkey will be removed later. The crisis is over. The world breathes again. But nothing is the same. The Cold War has reached its most dangerous moment. Leaders have seen how close they came to disaster. A phone line is set up. A direct link between Washington and Moscow. A way to speak, to prevent mistakes, to avoid catastrophe. The Cold War continues, but now the danger is clear. The world has changed. The stakes are higher. The next crisis could be worse. NATO must remain strong. The future is uncertain, and the battle for power is far from over. Chapter 5. The Warsaw Pact, an enemy alliance. The world is divided. 2 alliances, 2 enemies. NATO in the west, the Warsaw Pact in the east. Both sides prepare for war, a war that no one wants to fight. Soldiers train, tanks roll through cities, missiles stand ready. A single spark could set everything on fire. In 1955, the Soviet Union makes its move. NATO is strong, so the Soviets must be stronger. 8 nations join together: Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, and the Soviet Union. They sign an agreement, a promise, a warning. An attack on one is an attack on all. It is more than just words. The Soviet Union controls everything. Its army is the biggest. Its leaders give the orders. The other nations must follow. They have no choice. The Warsaw Pact is not just a military alliance. It is a tool, a weapon, a way to keep the Soviet Empire together. Tensions rise. The West watches. NATO is ready. But the real danger does not come from the outside. It comes from within. People in the East are unhappy. They do not want Soviet control. They dream of freedom. They whisper about democracy. They look to the West and wonder, could life be different? Then, in 1956, it begins. Hungary. Protests in the streets. People demand change. They want elections. They want freedom of speech. They want Soviet troops to leave. The government listens. A new leader comes to power. He promises reform. The people cheer. They celebrate. They believe change is coming. The Soviet Union does not agree. Moscow sends tanks. Soldiers march into Budapest. The fighting begins. Gunfire, explosions, cries for help. The people resist. They throw stones. They make barricades. They fight for their future. But they are no match for the Soviet army. The world watches. NATO watches. But no one comes to help. The risk is too great. If NATO acts, the war could spread. It could become something worse. The Hungarian fighters stand alone. The battle does not last long. The Soviets crush the rebellion. Thousands die. Thousands more flee. The revolution is over. The message is clear. No one can leave the Warsaw Pact. 12 years pass. Another country, another uprising. Czechoslovakia, 1968. A new leader rises, Alexander Dubček. He speaks of change, a new kind of socialism, freedom of the press, freedom to travel, a better life. The people are hopeful. They believe this time will be different. The Soviet Union is afraid. If one country breaks free, others may follow. The Warsaw Pact must stay strong. Moscow waits. Then, one summer night, the decision is made. Tanks roll in. More than 200,000 troops cross the borders. Soldiers from Poland, East Germany, Hungary, Bulgaria. The invasion has begun. The people protest. They hold flags. They sing songs. They block roads with their bodies. But they do not fight. They do not have weapons. They have only words. "Go home," they shout. "We are not enemies." But the soldiers have their orders. The government falls. The dream of freedom is crushed again. The West sees everything. NATO leaders meet. They talk, they argue, but they do not act. The truth is painful. This is the Soviet Union's world. NATO cannot interfere. The Cold War has rules, unspoken but understood. The East belongs to the Soviets. The West belongs to NATO. Neither side can cross the line. For the people of Eastern Europe, hope fades. They know now, no one will come to save them. The Iron Curtain is strong. The Warsaw Pact will not break, not yet. But the dream of freedom does not disappear. It waits. It grows. And one day, it will rise again. Chapter 6. The Berlin Wall Falls. What now? The night is cold. The air is still. People gather in the streets, their faces filled with hope, fear, disbelief. For years they have waited. For years they have dreamed of this moment. But is it real? Can it really be happening? A wall has stood between them for decades. A wall of concrete, of steel, of armed guards. A wall that separated families, friends, lives. No one crossed without permission. No one left without risk. Those who tried were stopped. Some escaped. Many did not. For years, the world accepted it. The East belonged to the Soviets. The West remained free. But now, something is different. Something is changing. The people of East Germany are no longer afraid. They march. They shout. They demand freedom. The government wavers. The pressure is too much. And then the words are spoken. A press conference, a mistake. A government official speaks too soon, too carelessly. The border is open, he says. The people hear it. They believe it. They rush to the wall. They demand to cross. The guards do not know what to do. Their orders are unclear. They wait. The crowd grows. Thousands now, pushing, calling, celebrating. Then a single moment. One decision. A gate opens. A rush of people floods through. Families embrace. Strangers cheer. Tears fall. The world watches. Television screens show the impossible. People climb the wall. They take hammers, chisels, bare hands. Piece by piece, the wall begins to break. Concrete crumbles. The symbol of division, of control, of fear, falls. The Cold War is over. But what now? NATO was created to stand against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is gone. Some say NATO should end, that its purpose is finished. But others see a different future. The world is still uncertain. Power is shifting. New dangers may come. Eastern European nations, once trapped behind the Iron Curtain, look to NATO. They want protection. They want security. They want a place among the free. One by one they join. Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic. More follow. The alliance does not shrink. It grows. Russia watches. Russia is not pleased. NATO moves closer, step by step, border by border. Promises were made, some say. NATO would not expand. But it does. Trust fades. Suspicion rises. The world is changing again. New threats emerge. Terrorism, cyber warfare, regional conflicts, NATO adapts. New missions, new battles, but old tensions never disappear. The Cold War may be over, but history is never truly finished. For now, NATO remains. It stands as a shield, a symbol of unity, but the question remains: for how long and at what cost? Chapter 7. NATO expands. Russia reacts. The Soviet Union is no more. Its empire has collapsed. The Cold War is over. Countries that once lived under Soviet control now have a choice. They can decide their future. They can choose a new path. And many look to the West. The world watches as history unfolds. Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, nations that once belonged to the Warsaw Pact, knock on NATO's door. They want security. They want protection. They want to be part of something stronger. They remember the past. They remember Soviet tanks rolling through their streets. They do not want it to happen again. In 1999, their wish is granted. NATO accepts them. The alliance grows. New members, new borders, new commitments. The old division between East and West begins to disappear. But not everyone is pleased. In Moscow, frustration grows. Russia watches, Russia warns. It remembers a different time, when its influence stretched across Eastern Europe. It remembers being a superpower, a force the world feared. Now, its power is weaker. Its voice is quieter. But it is not silent. More countries follow. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, once part of the Soviet Union itself, join NATO. Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia. One by one, the alliance expands. A promise was made, some say. NATO would not move east. But now, it stands on Russia's doorstep. Tensions rise. Russia feels surrounded. It sees NATO troops in places that were once under its control. It sees missiles, bases, military exercises. NATO says, we are a defensive alliance. It says, we do not seek war. But Russia does not believe. In 2008, a new crisis begins. Georgia, a former Soviet republic, wants to join NATO. Russia sees this as a threat. It warns, it threatens, and then it acts. Russian tanks cross into Georgia. A short war. A clear message. Moscow will not allow NATO to come any closer. The world takes notice. NATO takes notice. But Georgia is not a member. There is no obligation to defend. The alliance watches, it condemns, but it does not intervene. Russia has drawn a line. Years pass. The tension does not fade. NATO continues to expand. In 2014, another shock. Ukraine, a revolution, a government falls. The people demand change. Russia sees danger. A new government in Ukraine leans toward the West. It speaks of NATO. It speaks of Europe. Russia does not wait. Its soldiers move. Crimea is taken. The world reacts with anger, sanctions, diplomatic warnings. But Russia does not turn back. It secures its position. NATO responds with troops, military exercises, promises of support. But there is no war. Not yet. The question remains, how far will NATO go? How far will Russia go? The Cold War is over, but the conflict is not. The past is not forgotten. The future is uncertain, and the balance of power is still shifting. Chapter 8. September 11th and a new kind of war. The morning is quiet. The sky is clear. People go to work, drink their coffee, make plans for the day. Life moves as it always does. But in an instant, everything changes. A plane appears in the sky, too low, too fast. Then impact, fire, smoke, confusion. A second plane follows. The world realizes this is not an accident. This is an attack. The twin towers burn. People run. Chaos spreads. Then another plane strikes the Pentagon. A fourth crashes into a field. Thousands are dead. The world is in shock. The United States is wounded. Fear grips the nation. Who did this? Why? Questions race through every mind. The answer comes soon. A terrorist group, Al-Qaeda, hiding in Afghanistan, led by a man the world now knows, Osama bin Laden. The U.S. prepares to respond, but it is not alone. NATO watches, and then something historic happens. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty is invoked. The rule is clear. An attack on one is an attack on all. The alliance stands together. The mission is clear. Find the enemy. Stop them. The war in Afghanistan begins. Bombs fall. Troops land. The Taliban, the group that protects Al-Qaeda, is strong. But NATO is stronger. Cities fall. The enemy retreats. It seems like victory is near. But this war is different. It is not against a country. It is not against an army. It is against an idea, a network, a hidden enemy that does not fight in the open. Months pass, then years. The battles continue. NATO soldiers patrol villages, search for militants, try to rebuild. But the enemy hides in the mountains, in the deserts, among the people. The war does not end. Doubt grows. Is NATO ready for this kind of war? This is not the Cold War. There are no borders to defend, no armies to face. The battlefield is everywhere, and the price is high. Soldiers die. Resources are drained. Public support fades. Then, after years of searching, a message comes. A mission has been completed. Osama bin Laden is dead. The world takes a breath. But the war is not over. The Taliban regroups. Attacks continue. After 20 years, NATO makes a decision. It is time to leave. Troops withdraw. The Afghan government must stand alone, but it does not last. In days, the Taliban returns. The war ends where it began. The world watches. Some call it failure. Some say it was never NATO's fight. But one thing is certain. The world has changed. War is no longer just nations against nations. It is different now, and NATO must change too. Chapter 9. Ukraine. The tipping point. The streets of Kyiv are alive with voices. People gather in the cold, wrapped in coats, holding flags, standing together. They chant, they sing, they demand change. Their government has chosen a different path, one that leads back to Russia. But the people want something else. They want Europe. They want democracy. They want freedom. At first, the protests are peaceful, but the government is afraid. It sends police, then soldiers. Rubber bullets turn to real bullets. Smoke fills the air. The world watches as the conflict grows. The people refuse to back down. They build barricades. They fight. They fall. Then, suddenly, the government collapses. The president flees. The people celebrate. A new Ukraine is born. But far away, in Moscow, another plan is unfolding. The Kremlin sees chaos, sees an opportunity. Russian soldiers move, quietly, quickly, without warning. Crimea is surrounded. Military bases fall without a fight. The Russian flag is raised. A part of Ukraine is gone. The world reacts. NATO holds emergency meetings. Leaders speak in strong words. Sanctions are placed, but no troops are sent. No war begins. Russia says Crimea has chosen its future. NATO says it is an invasion. But neither side takes the first step toward battle. Then, the war spreads. Eastern Ukraine erupts in fighting. Armed groups take control of cities. Ukraine fights back. But it is not a fair fight. Weapons come from across the border. Soldiers without uniforms appear in the night. The front lines shift. Villages burn. Families flee. Years pass. The war does not end. Ceasefires come and go. But the fighting never stops completely. Then one day, the world wakes up to something bigger, something worse. Tanks roll across the border. Missiles rain down on Ukrainian cities. Explosions light up the sky. This is no longer a hidden war. It is an invasion. A full-scale attack. Ukraine fights back. The world watches in shock. NATO responds, but carefully. No troops, no direct battle. Instead, weapons flow. Ammunition, drones, missiles, money. Ukraine is not alone, but it is still outnumbered. Russia warns. Stay out, it says. This is our war. NATO stands firm. We defend democracy. The tension rises. Leaders meet, troops move, borders are reinforced. Europe prepares. The war drags on. Cities are reduced to rubble. Millions flee their homes. The cost is high. The end is unknown. The question is whispered across the world. Could this become something more? Could this be the start of something even worse? The Cold War ended long ago, but something new is forming. A different kind of conflict, a different kind of danger. The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear. NATO and Russia are closer to the edge than ever before. Chapter 10. The NATO-Russia conflict today. The war rages on. Cities burn. Families flee. Ukraine fights for survival, outnumbered but not broken. The world watches. Some send weapons. Some send money. But NATO does not send troops. It is not their war. Yet, it feels closer every day. How much help is enough? How much is too much? They must walk a thin line. Support Ukraine, but do not start a world war. Russia watches every move. It warns, it threatens. The message is clear. Stay out. But NATO does not back down. Along the borders, soldiers stand ready. Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Bases grow. Tanks arrive. Fighter jets patrol the skies. NATO strengthens its front. A clear signal to Moscow. This far, no further. The threats do not stop. Nuclear warnings, cyber attacks, misinformation spreads like wildfire. Trust is fragile. The world holds its breath. Could this be the start of something more? A new Cold War? Or something worse? Sanctions hit Russia hard. Its economy shakes. Protests rise. But the Kremlin stands firm. We will not lose, they say. The battle continues. The cost grows. Both sides dig in. Peace talks come and go. But no one surrenders. Tensions rise beyond Ukraine. Finland and Sweden, once neutral, seek NATO's protection. A historic change. Russia is surrounded. More borders, more bases. Moscow calls it a provocation. NATO calls it defense. The divide grows deeper. The world is different now. It is no longer just NATO and Russia. China watches closely. Iran, North Korea, silent but waiting. Alliances shift. A single spark could light a fire, and once it begins, no one knows how it will end. For now, the war continues. The future is uncertain. NATO stands firm. Russia does not yield, and the world waits, hoping that history does not repeat itself. Chapter 11. NATO's biggest challenges. The world is changing. New threats, new wars, new enemies. But NATO remains. It was built to defend, built to protect, built to stand strong against any danger. Yet now questions grow. Some ask if it is still necessary. Some wonder if it is strong enough. Others fear it is too powerful. Inside NATO, voices clash. Leaders argue. Who should pay? Who should fight? Some nations spend more, some spend less. The United States carries the greatest burden. It demands fairness. Europe must do more, it says. Some agree. Some resist. The debate does not end. The battlefield is different now. No longer just tanks and soldiers. No longer only about borders. Wars are fought in cyberspace. Attacks come without warning. Hacking, misinformation, silent weapons that cannot be seen but can cause chaos. NATO must prepare for the unseen enemy. Terrorism remains a shadow over the world. The wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, NATO was there. Troops were sent, battles were fought, but victory was unclear. Some say NATO failed. Some say it was never its fight. Now, NATO faces the question, should it intervene again, or should it stay away? Tensions inside the alliance grow. Some leaders question their loyalty. Some nations move closer to Russia, to China. Trust is tested. Alliances are shaken. Yet NATO still stands. Its members still meet. Promises are still made. An attack on one is an attack on all. But do all nations believe in those words? In the East, Russia watches. In the Pacific, China rises. The world is no longer the same. NATO was made for one enemy. But now, the threats are many. Can it face them all? Can it survive in a world that no longer looks like the one it was created to protect? For now, NATO holds together. But the cracks are visible. The future is uncertain. The world waits to see what comes next. Chapter 12. The future of NATO. The world is uncertain. Conflicts rise, technology advances, old alliances are tested, new enemies appear. The question is no longer just about war. It is about power. It is about survival. NATO was built for the past. But can it face the future? The alliance stands at a crossroads. Some say it must grow. More countries, more strength, more unity. Others say it must change. Focus less on military force, more on diplomacy, intelligence, and new technology. The battlefield is no longer only land, air, and sea. Now it is cyberspace, satellites, artificial intelligence. The fight is silent, invisible, unpredictable. In Eastern Europe, Russia remains a threat. Its war in Ukraine has shaken the world. NATO responds with weapons, with sanctions, with military presence. But the war drags on. It is a test, a warning. If Ukraine falls, who is next? The Baltic states? Poland? The question lingers. NATO must decide how far it is willing to go. Beyond Europe, new challenges rise. China grows stronger. Its military expands. Its influence spreads. NATO was made to counter Russia. But can it also stand against a rising China? Should it? Some members say yes. Others hesitate. A shift in focus could mean a new kind of Cold War. Inside the alliance, there are cracks. Some countries question their place. Some leaders doubt NATO's future. Trust must be maintained. Promises must be kept. If one nation falls, will the others stand? The world is watching. Enemies are waiting. A single moment of weakness could change everything. The future of NATO is not only about war. It is about peace, about diplomacy, about cooperation. Can it prevent conflicts before they begin? Can it adapt before it is too late? The answer is unclear, but one thing is certain: NATO's story is not over.